We're now on Daf Yutes Omid Beis. Mechusar B'Hipurim. Right, the Mishnah mentions the case of a Zav who has counted already as Zayin Akiyim. He went to Mikvah. He had Hariv Shemesh, but he didn't bring his korban. And therefore, he's still considered, a leftover tumah. And if he does the avoda, he's machal the avoda. Minolan, how do we know this? Amar Avhuna de Amar Kro. The chiper oleh koin v'tahera. Tahera michlal shehi tmeya. In other words, the psukim before that already indicated that he was tamei. So why does it add v'tahera here? What's the purpose of the extra word v'tahera? And amongst the mechusrei kapara, one of them is a yoledes. She has to bring a korban. And the Torah says that the kapara power is brought about by the Kohen and v'tahera. Tahera michlal shehi tmeya. In other words, why do you say that the Kohen, through his maisa of ritzui korban and kaparas hakorban, is going to be mitayr her? She already went through the entire process of tar. The answer is no. She didn't bring her korban, and in the absence of her korban, she needs tara. Same thing, of course, of applied to a Kohen. If he was a zav and now he did everything except for bring his korban, he cannot do the avodah. He's machal the avodah. Then the Mishnah has shelo rochutz yadayim v'raglayim. How do we know that if the Kohen did not wash his feet and his hands, he is machal the avodah? Asya, we derive from Gzeir Shava chuka mi mechuser begodim. And the word chukah appears by someone who's missing his big day kuna, and it also appears by someone who did not do rechitzas yadayim v'raglayim. And just like in the case of mechutza begodim, he's not considered a Kohen, and therefore his avodah is possible. So too, if a Kohen is a Kohen, but he didn't do rechitza of yadayim v'raglayim. In the avodah that we read yesterday in the Musaf, there was a lot of mention of the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim of the Kohen Gadol, time after time. Tana Rabbanim, we learned in Brayso Kohen Gadol shel tov v'shel kiddush. Being beged lebeged, ubein avoda lavoda, v'ovid avodaso kshera. What happens in a case where the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur did not immerse himself, or alternatively, he did not do rechitzas yadayim v'raglayim, even though once he takes off one set of begadim, let's say the big day lava, and he puts on the big day zav, he's obligated to do a kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and he's got to do tefillah, but nevertheless, avodas kshera. The echad kohen gadol, the echad kohen hejot, shel kiddush yadav v'raglav, shachris, the avad avodas psula. So whether it's a kohen gadol or a regular rank and file kohen hejot, if he didn't do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim ala boker in the morning, and he went ahead and he did the avodah in the mikdash, his avodah is possible. Omer Avasi le Rabbi Yochanan. Michti, let's look at this. Chamesh tefillas hasar kiddushim doraisa. The Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur underwent no less than 5 tefillos. And why asara kiddushim? Every tefillah requires a kiddush yadayim raglayim before, and this is derived from psukim in the Torah in the Gemara and Yuma on Daf Lamed Beis. V'chuka ksivba li'akvu. And with regard to this parsha and this requirement of kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, the Torah says chuka, and chuka means that it's critical, it's indispensable. Amalei. So Rav Yochanan responds to Rav Asi, and he says, Amakra ulevesham levisha ma'akeves ve'dovrach ma'akev. So what is the shita of Rabbi Yochanan here? The pasuk says in Vayikra Tezayin, Kisones bad kodesh yilbash, u'michnasei vad yu al besoro, v'rochatz b'mayim es besoro, u'levei shom. So it says Yilbash at the beginning of the pasuk, Kisones bad kodesh yilbash, and then again it repeats it. And it says Ulevei shom. So the first pasuk of Yilbash tells us that without Bigdei Kahuna, he's not able to do the avod. However, this instruction of Verochatz B'mayim with regard to other avodos is not essential. And therefore the avodah is kshera, despite the fact that he hasn't done Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. No. This pasuk, you have to underline and bold the words Michnasei Bad. Michnasei Bad are what's called the Big Day Lavan. And the Torah adds ulevesham to tell you, because we have a principle in Kodshim that whatever is repeated, it's likuva, it's critical. So therefore, the Torah repeats the levisha of the Big Day Lavan in this case to tell you that without the Big Day Lavan, the avodah is psula. However, when it comes to Tvila, and Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, since the Torah didn't repeat it, it would seem that it's not likuva. Again, I think what's going on here, he did one Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, he did one Tvila. Now he has to repeat himself between every avodah. That is not critical. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan attacks Rav Asi, who postulates that all Chamesh Tfilos and Asar Kiddushin are likuva, based on V'chuka. Tzavu Polav, so Rav Asi got very embarrassed about it. Amalei, Rabbi Yochanan says to Rav Asi the Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan, Vav a'ufta kisvei loch. So this is some sort of an idiomatic phrase. I have written for you a vav upon a wooden log. Now, I think what he's doing here is saying that a vav upon a wooden log is illegible. I guess because, the bark of the wood has cracks in it and a vav looks like, another crack. But basically, Rabbi Yochanan is saying what I answered to you was not a valid answer. Because if what I said is true, I guess you wouldn't even need that first Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim and Tefillah. Okay, it's a little bit difficult because, as we said before, the very first Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, that's a general halacha the whole year round. That's for sure is likuva. So I don't know exactly what he means over here. Omar Chizkiah, Omar Kra, The pasuk says, "V'hoisol lahem chak olam lo uzaro lidorosam." So it means the first kiddush yadayim raglayim, and for that matter, the first tefillah is absolutely critical, and that's called chak olam, and davar ma'akiv bizaro ma'akiv bo. In other words, without kiddush yadayim raglayim, the avoda is mechulelis. Davar she'eno ma'akiv bizaro, eno ma'akiv bo. Right, the initial kiddush yadayim raglayim, which is ma'akiv in all avodos of kahuna, that for sure is critical in the case of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur. But the additional kiddush yadayim raglayim, which we said happens to happen 10 times, am I right? So I guess 9 out of 10 of those kiddushim, which do not apply to zaro, are not ma'akiv. Rabbi Yonasan Omer mehocha. Right? How do we know that kiddush yadayim raglayim is critical? V'rochatzu mimenu Moshe v'Aaron ubanav. So we're talking about the kiyar here in Shmos Perik Mem. And v'rochatzu. Dover ha'ma'akiv v'bonav ma'akiv dover she'enu ma'akiv v'bonav einu ma'akiv. So Rabbi Yonasan is bringing a different pasuk. So again, the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim beyond the first one, which is a requirement for the Kohen Gadol on Avodas Yom Kippurim, but is not required to ordinary Kohanim the whole year round. Therefore, it's not ma'akev on Yom Kippur. Frek the Gemara of Rabbi Yochanan, my time alo Omar Kiddushizki. Why doesn't he like the pasuk of Vaysalem Chakolam Lo Zaro L'Dorasam? Omar Lecha, he will say, "This is Rabbi Yonasan, Hahu L'Doros Hu Dichsiv." So the pasuk is telling us that there's an obligation for all generations to come of Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. But that's not going to tell me that if it's Ma'akev Bizarro, it's going to be Ma'akev Bo. Be'idach my time alo Omar Mihai. So why isn't Chizkiah happy with this pasuk quoted by Rabbi Yonasan, Rochzu Mimenu, Moshe, V'Aaron, Ubano? Yibaylech Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. Diamar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Kol Kiyar, She'ein Bo Kidei L'Kadish Arba Kohanim Mimenu, Ein Makajim Bo. Shenemar, V'Rochatzu Mimenu, Moshe V'Aaron Ubano. Notice if we count up, Moshe and Aaron are 2. He has 2 remaining sons. Elazar v'Itamar, that's 4 Kohanim. And Mimenu is referring to the Kiyar. So the Kiyar has to have enough water in it so that we can do the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim of 4 Kohanim. Now I'm curious to know if that shear and that required minimum amount would apply even after the first Kohen did his Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So my impression would be that even if the Kiddush Yadayim Raglaim of Kohen number one would remove some of the water from the Kiyar, but nevertheless the shear of 4 Kohen, it means that there was enough that was also calculated into the cheshbon. So interesting that Moshe Rabbeinu was a Kohen here, but that's during the what do you call it the Chanukah Sabayis, Moshe was functioning as a Kohen. Tana Rabbanu learned to the Brisa, Kate said mitzvahs Kiddush. How do you fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush? Meiniach yodo ayumanis al gabi raglo ayumanis. He puts his right hand over his right foot, excuse me. Well, let's do the hand first. Right hand over his right foot. Well, not over, but I think he actually, I mean, there's gymnastics here. V'yoro asmolis al gabi raglo asmolis. Right, so he basically like that. And he puts it into the water of the kiyah. However, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer meniach shtei yodav zu al gabi zu. He should put one hand on top of the other. Al gabi shtei raglov zu al gabi zu. I guess he moves from one leg to the other with his hands one on top of the other. Kadesh. Omru lo hifladigta yef shalasos kid. If he's going into the kiyar with one hand on top of the other, how is he going to put his hands on one foot and then his hands on another foot? I mean, how is he going to balance this? I think basically the Gemara says hiflagta. It's haflaga. Haflaga means when you exaggerate. There's no way ef shalasos can. It can't be done. So now we have to know, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, what did he respond? Shapir Kamale, Omer of Yosef, Vechavero Mesayato. So I guess when he's doing this whole acrobatics act from one foot to the other foot, he has a friend of one of his colleagues of the Kohanim who's going to help him out, support him. My Beinayu. So is there an afkamina between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda? I mean, they seem to imply there are two different methods of Tara. Omar Abaye, Amida ben Atzad Ika Beinayu. He stands from the side. Okay. Now, anything the Kohen does in the context of Mikdash has to be done standing. So what is this business of Amidim and Atzad? According to Rabbi Yossi, the Kohen is able to fulfill the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim by standing with the assistance of another. So therefore, he can achieve, with the assistance of another, the simultaneous sanctification of his hands and feet in the optimal manner. Placing one foot on top of the other, placing both hands on top of his feet, sanctifying 4 limbs at once. The Rabbanan, on the other hand, hold that an act of standing that is dependent upon someone else's support, right? He can only stand because he's leaning on someone else. That's not called Amida. That's why some people, if you notice, when it comes to Hashamnu V'Gadnu and Al-Chet, Vidu, you have to say Vidu in a standing position. They won't even lean on a table or on a stender. Amalei Rav Sama, Braid Rav Ashi Ravina, Belasiv Masiv Lakadesh. Why can't the Kohen do this in a sitting position? Why do you say he has to stand to do Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim? My krol is Sharis, because Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim is called L'Sharis. Pasuk says, "Bevom el hakodesh el ol moed yichatzu mayim v'lo yamusu." So Tzitzis Yadayim is going to facilitate his ability to do the avoda, and that's called l'shares. V'sheres me'umaru, and any avoda has to be done in a standing position, and that's based on the mission that we had back on Tezvav. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brisa, Kidesh Yadav Raglav Biyom. Let's say he does it in the morning. Does he have to do a Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim, sanctify his hands for the night when he does avoda at night, like Hektek Halovim? Ain't tzarich l'kadosh b'layla. But what if he did the Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim at night? That's fine for the night. But tzarich l'kadosh b'yom. He needs another Kiddush with daybreak. Shahaya Rebbe Omer, Lina Mo Elis B'Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim. If he leaves his hand overnight, and the night passes over his hands, then the impact of the Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim is gone. And he's got to do a brand new one. However, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Ein Lida Mo Eles B'Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglaim. There's no problem with leaving his hands overnight, according to Rabbi Eliezer. There's no psul of lina. Tanya, you had another brayso. Omedu makro gavim mizbeach kol halayla li oron ton kiddush yadayim divrei Rebbe. Rav Eliezer, Rav Shimon Omer came on shekiddush yad raglo mitchilas havoda. Afil mikan v'ad asar yomim ein tzarich l'kadosh. So he starts his avoda. He does a kiddush yadayim reglaim before his avoda. He's going to serve now in the mikdash for 10 days consecutively. He doesn't have to do another kiddush yadayim reglaim, according to Rav Eliezer. Whereas Rebbe holds that within a day you don't have to do another kiddush yadayim. Within a night you don't have to do a kiddush yadayim reglaim. And if you did kiddush yadayim in the daytime, that's okay for the nighttime. But if you did kiddush yadayim reglaim at nighttime, that's not going to be sufficient for the avoda of the daytime. Utzricha. Tiyashmin kamaisa. If you have the case where the Kohen was not busy constantly doing the avoda, by hikama Rebbe, that's where Rebbe says the Kohen requires a kiddush yadayim for aglayim when day breaks. The pasuk leimi avoda lavoda. Once he completes one avoda and he starts another avoda, he needs a new kiddush yadayim for aglayim. Avol beha delo pasak le. But the second Bryce is talking about a case where there were no interruptions between the avodos. Ema module Rebbe Rebbe Eliezer Reb Shimon. I might have had the Havamina that Rebbe would agree and concede to Reb Shimon if there was no pasakle. There was no interruption. So the impact of the original Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim could continue on and on, even after daybreak. The Yashmin and Baha, if we only had the case in the second Brisa where the Kohen was constantly doing the avoda, Baha Kamar Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimon, that's when Rabbi Eliezer holds you don't have to do another Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim with daybreak. Aval Beha Ema Modulei Rebbe. But in the case of the first Brisa, where the Kohen was not doing the avoda continuously, I might have said that Modulei Rebbe. He agrees to Rebbe that the original Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim was completely null and void. Tzricha, therefore I need both. My time of the Rebbe, what led Rebbe to the conclusion that when he wakes up in the morning after he had done the night before Kiddush Yadayim, he needs another Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim to ksiv big gish tam. So now there's a new gisha, a new approaching to the Mizbeach with daybreak, a whole new set of karbonos. So therefore it makes sense to say that the Kohen needs Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. My timer, the Rebbe Lezer, Reb Shimon. So why does Rebbe Lezer reject this l'chora, this very solid derivation of the Gishtam that now after dawn it's a brand new approach to the Mizbeach? T'chsiv bivoam. Okay, so what does the word bivoam teach me? Bivoam, according to Rebbe Lezer's interpretation, is a Kohen who's already undergone Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, and he didn't leave the Chatzar Migdash. He doesn't have to do a new Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So Gemara asks, "V'idach nami yaksiv bivoam." What about the Tanakama Rebbe? Why did the Torah have to add the word bivoam, which we thought, according to Rebbe Lezer, is teaching me that he doesn't have to do a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim constantly, as long as he didn't leave the holy environs of the Beis Hamikdash. If the Torah had only written Begishtam, then Hava Minal Kol Gisha V'Gisha, which I guess means that if he does many avodas within the same day, same part of the day, he would have to prepare Big Day Kahuna and Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Is therefore Kosvar Achmona Bivoam, and that teaches us that the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim will be effective anytime it's Begisham, he approaches the Mizbeach, so Gemara asks, "V'idach nami oksiv v'gishtam, iksiv v'vav oksiv v'gishtam, avamin afilu abirei konis." So Gemara says, "What do you mean abirei konis oksiv l'sharis?" L'sharis means that he doesn't come in empty-handed. Ella, therefore, the Gemara says, "V'gishtam mi boile l'chidei Rav Achabar." We need the word v'gishtam for another halacha. Akol modem v'kiddush sheni. Shulavush Mekadesh, which means while he's wearing the Big Day Kahuna, he's going to be Mekadesh. Right, this is a sugya in Yuma and Daf Lamed Aleph about how to do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. According to Tanakama there, this was done before the Kohen Gadol removed his Big Day Kahuna. So the Kohen Gadol washed his hands and feet while wearing his Big Day Kahuna. But Rabbi Meir suggests that the washing was done after the Kohen Gadol, later on was undressed. Tilmakra o begishtam misha ena mechusar elagisha bilvad. Yotzezeh shemechusar levisha v'gisha. Right, he hasn't put on his Big Day Kahuna, he hasn't come to the Mizbeach, and therefore he is unfit for Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. He first has to put on his Big Day Kahuna, and then he could undergo Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. L'hakti rishel lamali. How do we know that Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is a critical pre-avoda requirement, and even in the case of haktoras, haimurim, burning those parts that have to be burned, that's included in gisha, and therefore they require kiddush yadayim v'aglayim, even though haktoras haimurim is not li'ikuva, it's an avodah she'eno me'akeves. Okay, then, so this is where we'll stop here on the top of Daf Chaf. Okay, then, wish you a great day. Thank you so much.